Hi, everybody. My name's Jeff, and I'll be spending the next roughly an hour with you or so. I know it's the end of the day. I'm very fortunate that I'm not standing in between you and drinks here at the end of the day. I see some of you came equipped, so that's good. Small enough group, and end of the day, little social lubricants. So let's make it interactive. Yell and scream, raise your hand, say, "Hey, Jeff, I disagree. You're full of water. You're whatever. Let's talk about it. It'd be fun." And so a little bit about kind of me and where I came from and the perspective that I bring to this. I spent my time after graduating college out at Microsoft, where I was in the kernel group. I worked on NT4, NT5, which became Windows 2000. And this was in the mid-90s when we first started seeing the mass mailers that we all remember. So this is Melissa, Lovebug, Code Red. What's that? No, I know David Cutler. I didn't work with them. I was in the kernel group. I worked with like Mark L and people like that. No, it's fine. So I guess this is public knowledge, but Mark L is famously known for the guy that Steve Ballmer threw a chair at. Allegedly. But yeah, it was a fun time back then. So as a result of those experiences, I started an internal malicious testing program at Microsoft. We didn't do malicious testing back in the mid-90s of Microsoft products. We did functional testing. Functional testing is great, but when you have a bad guy doing things you didn't think about, you need to, red team or malicious test or, tiger team, whatever you want to call it. And it gave me an appreciation for understanding how the bad guys view your system and understanding how, as a system architect, as a defender, you need to understand what the bad guys do and how they do it and take that into consideration. So I've been involved in offensive testing, again, red teaming, now purple teaming and other things, pretty much my entire career. And I really value that that perspective. That's where I come from. I'm with GoSecure. GoSecure does those sorts of things, as you can imagine, offensive testing and other professional services, and we're a full service provider of MDR and other managed services. And that's the extent of the commercial from me. So now we get to the more fun stuff. How do you know what you need? Interesting question, right? I mean, we're awash in security tools, lots of stuff, lots of people saying that you need their things. I'll unabashedly say you need our things. But how do you know? If you're a CISO, if you're a CIO, how do you choose? It's an interesting question. I think the even more interesting question is, how do you know what you don't need or no longer need? So everybody buys tools, and some of the enterprise customers that I work with, they now describe their situation as tool hell or toolapalooza or whatever you want to call it, but they've just got too much stuff. You accumulate tools over the years. Is that me squeaking? Oh, it's okay. You accumulate tools over the years. Many times, if you're a big company, you'll set up a project to deploy whatever, and whatever will get a budget assigned to it and a project plan and a couple of folks, and you'll meet some deployment objective. You'll get 30% of the total functionality of that tool deployed. You'll declare victory. It'll have an operating budget moving forward, and then nobody will ever look at it again. How do you get rid of that tool when you don't need it? How do you know if it's overlapping now with 7 other tools that you've bought in the meantime? How do you know if whatever that tool does is no longer necessary, given your threat landscape, given what the bad guys are doing, given how the software and the systems that you have are deployed? I think that people in general don't spend enough time thinking about decommissioning tools. All security people think a lot about what we need and what we need to buy and how we need to get more budget, but we don't think about what we don't need anymore. And what we don't need anymore, not only does it waste resources, but also it presents security surface area in and of itself that can be attacked or have bugs or be a problem. This is the current state of the art of how tools are selected. One of a couple of techniques. Whack-a-mole. We all know that technique very well. That's a valid technique for tool selection. Who throws the best parties? That's definitely a valid mechanism for tool selection, particularly pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I don't know if the party selection metric has been as effective, but it used to be very effective. This is a show not unlike the show we're at right now, just much, much larger, RSA. My favorite thing, my first RSA was actually RSA 3. RSA 3 was at the Hilton across from the airport back before it was in the Moscone Center. Even as a security expert, you walk into a place like RSA, right? If you know, how many here have been to RSA? Yeah, okay. So you walk in, RSA is 3 rooms that big, right? It's a sea of humanity and marketing things. It's debilitating. Even as a security expert, how do you look at that and know what you need? Really? You walk up and down the aisles and people tell you their things and it all sounds great, but how do you know, right? Everybody is pretty sure that what they're telling you is really, really important and what you need, but it's got to be a more scientific way to do this. If you're a CISO, you get 2 questions. This is one of them. Are you protected against thing of the day? Thing of the day is Russia, thing of the day is North Korea, thing of the day is ransomware, thing of the day is Iran after the Soleimani situation 2 years ago. Are you protected against whatever? Boards, CEOs, chief risk officers, they all hear about X from their buddies. They hear about X from their law firms and their advisors and their groups, and then they run back to the CISO and they say, hey, what are we doing about whatever? Well, okay. What's the answer to that? And especially if it's something kind of obscure like a threat actor group. How are we doing against Russia? I don't know. We've got CrowdStrike. Okay. CrowdStrike's pretty good. They write a lot about Russia. If you're worried about Russia, you buy CrowdStrike. If you're worried about China, you buy Mandiant, right? But how do you know? How do you present a defensible story when the CEO or the board comes in and says, how are we doing against a particular threat actor group, loss scenario, any of those things? You could say, we have these tools and, we do these things and, we had a pen test last week and, we had a GRC engagement and, those are all kind of circumstantial evidence, right? It's not a convincing story. This is the other question. This is actually my favorite question. This is the incremental dollar question. If I have another $1 of security budget, where do I spend it to optimize the security value that I get from it? So there's lots of places you can spend another $1 of security budget, and all the people out here, and my company included, will all help you spend that $1. But how do I know that what I'm spending it on is the best use of that $1? I could buy a firewall. I could buy an IDS. I could buy CrowdStrike. I could buy, Cloudflare. I could buy lots of different things, and they're all great. How do I know which is the best for my use, for what I need? How do I optimize my spend on that $1? How do I tell a defensible story that says this is what I want to spend it on, and here's why? Okay. In the backdrop of all of that, again, I come from offensive testing, right? What is offensive testing, really? Offensive testing is controls validation, or in other words, professional parade rainers. Offensive testers tell people that your controls don't work the way you think they do. People swear up and down, left and right, they have a particular control. Oh yeah, we have 47 character passwords. Oh, great. And see, look, it's written down right here in the policy. Okay, That's fine. Pen tester comes in and says, oh yeah, but these service accounts, they all have 5-character passwords because they were grandfathered into the policy. Oh shit, I didn't know that. We have NAC, network access control. That's great. Nobody can jack into our network. Oh, really? Yeah, NAC never works the way people think it does. And it's pretty trivial to get around almost always. If you implement NAC in a way that's not trivial to get around, everything stops working. Pretty difficult. Controls don't work the way that people think they do. So because you think you have a control, even if it's written down or even if a vendor says that you have a control written, that you think you have, you got to check it. There's some confidence associated with that. It might not be set up correctly. Again, NAC is great. If you use NAC the way the RFC says, you can do a really good job, but no one ever does. Things like group policy objects for complex passwords are some of the most commonly misunderstood and misused controls out there. And it gets worse because controls degrade to a state of chaos over time. Left unmanaged, your controls tomorrow will be worse than they are today. And that's for any number of reasons. Some guy named Jeff changed something last week that nobody knows about or he shouldn't have. Some patch changed something. Some admin was irritated that things stopped working and so added admins to all users, and all of a sudden, their things started working, but everybody in your company is now, domain admin. Controls will tend to a state of chaos and a decrease in their overall security level over time, unless left unmanaged. This is an unfortunate reality, but again, this is one of those things that when you do offensive testing, you learn these things. You learn that controls don't work the way you think they do, and they get worse over time, and some guy named Jeff screwed things up last week because nothing works the way that we thought it did. Those are all kind of the bad news, grumpy security guy, professionals, parade rainer, all those things, security guys are full of bad news. There is some good news, though. Attackers are extremely predictable. They do a relatively small number of things over and over again because they work. Attackers use the same tools, they use the same infrastructure, they use the same techniques over and over again, and we should use that to our advantage. We don't. Very often, defenders are fairly young in their careers, particularly first-line defenders. You think about, kind of how hiring practices work. A large company will hire level 1, level 2 SOC analysts. Those are folks, kind of in their first jobs or early jobs in their security career. And man, those guys see what attackers do, what red teamers do, and they think it's magic. You show a young level 1 SOC analyst a tool like Mimikatz, and they're like, whoa, that's so cool. I didn't know you could dump creds from that. Wow. We need to use to our advantage more that attackers do things that are reasonably foreseeable and reasonably predictable, and train our defenders to be offense aware or attacker aware, attacker technique aware. There's a wonderful thing that happened that helps us do just that. It's called the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Everybody familiar with MITRE ATT&CK? So MITRE ATT&CK is a wonderful thing, and I'm a huge MITRE ATT&CK fanboy. I thought MITRE ATT&CK was cool before everybody else thought MITRE ATT&CK was cool, so for the record. MITRE ATT&CK, the history of MITRE ATT&CK is interesting. MITRE ATT&CK is way older than people think it is. It was invented to judge the DARPA competitions between automated attackers and automated defenders. So DARPA 6-7, and DARPA is Defense Advanced Research, whatever, projects agency, there we go. So 7 or 8 years ago, DARPA got this great idea that, hey, automated defense is a thing, and that means obviously automated offense is a thing. And so what happens if we have the automated defenders play against the automated attackers? What would happen? Super cool stuff. And there's a lot of papers out there. They've done, I think, 3 or 4 of these. They're called like the DARPA Grand Challenge or something. Read about them. They're super cool. And it's fascinating because like the AIs learn how to expose each other's weaknesses, right? Like the attackers learn that, speed to exploit, and the defenders learn to shut everything off quickly and figure it out later. It's kind of cool. But anyway, DARPA needed a way to keep score when all of that was happening, because it all happens really, really fast, right? You can imagine, both sides are automated. That loop runs very quickly. So things are going fast, and DARPA's looking at this, and they're like, we need a way to keep score, right? And so that's where MITRE ATT&CK came from. MITRE ATT&CK was a list of all of the things that an attacker could do, and a list of all of the things that a defender could do in general to counter those. It's kind of like punch, counter punch, but a list. The list is long. If you kind of go through and look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework in detail, it's long. It's several hundred techniques and sub-techniques, I think 350 or so now, give or take. But it's not excessively long. And it proves my point, right? There is a finite universe of things that attackers can do. It's about 300 things right now. And if I know as a defender what my move is in response to those 350 moves, okay, right now we got a chance. Now there's a way to understand the playing field. Some people have described MITRE ATT&CK as the other team's playbook, and to a certain extent, there's some truth to that, right? If you're an attacker, here are the things you can do. So now as a defender, what am I going to do in response to that? MITRE ATT&CK, before that, if you guys are familiar with the Lockheed Martin trademark, cyber kill chain, trademark, if there's any lawyers, Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, TM, it was also a very similar kind of progression, right? Attackers do things in order to attack a system, maintain persistence, et cetera, et cetera. The Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain is interesting and actionable, but it's not at the technique level of detail. So you can't really, you can organize your thinking around Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, but you can't organize your defensive tactics around it. So that's where the innovation of MITRE ATT&CK came from over previous versions. So MITRE ATT&CK has really given us the ability to make security more scientific, more deliberate. Right now, there's a lot of insecurity, right? Some guy like me that, oh yeah, we need to do this, this, and this because it's the right thing to do, and that's what everybody else is doing. Okay. I mean, yeah, that's the way it used to work, but I mean, is that really a great idea? We can now be more scientific. We can do better than that as a space. I love this concept of defense optimization. And some of the more sophisticated clients that I've worked with over the years, they actually have something called a defense optimization group internally. And it's similar to like security architects, but these are people thinking about these sorts of things, right? How do I optimize my defense based on my assets, my threat landscape, et cetera? Just the whole concept is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Defense optimization, I mean, like, how cool is that? Right? I mean, and it's the right way to think about things. We need to think about and be able to explain that incremental dollar problem, and I have something to talk about here more on that. But, boards and senior executives are asking that question, right? Gone are the days when, the security guy could go to the board and go to the senior executives and, with nothing more than fear, uncertainty, and doubt, unlock, millions of dollars in budget. That doesn't work anymore, and that's probably a good thing. Now we have to explain why. What are we going to spend it on? How is that our best incremental dollar? That's driven by metrics. It's driven by a very deliberate approach to putting in place controls that matter for what we're doing. We're also starting to talk more about controls maturity as opposed to just the mere existence of controls. So all of our favorite controls frameworks, right, whether ISO, COBIT, 853, and I say favorite lovingly because all of these frameworks are basically designed by auditors and accountants, and they're checkboxes, right? The control exists or it doesn't exist. So, up until 2 years ago, right, best practice was, to have 8 million character passwords with, 47 special characters and digits and everything else, and change it every 10 minutes. Well, that was a control. You might think you have that policy, as we talked about earlier, but how, is that the right policy? Is it mature? Is it completely distributed? Do all of your service accounts have it? Do your VDI accounts have it? Et cetera. That's a different question, right? And whether it just exists or not. The CMMC framework, which is relatively, how many of you guys are familiar with CMMC? Yeah, cool. So what I love about CMMC is, it's no accident that the first 3 characters are CMM, capability maturity model, based off of the Carnegie Mellon thinking. But the key, innovation is CMMC does not merely look at controls in an existence, non-existence test. All of our other frameworks for the past 30 years, all of our other IT frameworks, back to, Orange Book and everything else, way back in the day, those were all effectively existence-based controls assessments, right? CMMC, using the CMM framework, is yes, but how mature is that control? Is it documented? Is it repeatable? Is it the right control? Does it have a life cycle, et cetera? And that's the right way to do these things. It's a very, very important evolution in the science of controls from just, auditor-style checkboxes to, is it a mature control? Very important. We talked about MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE ATT&CK is, again, a major, scientific evolution in our space because it lets us look at attacker-defender dynamics, and we're going to talk more about that here. The NIST special publications are also a great resource if you haven't looked at those. There's NIST special publications for literally everything. And anything that's come out of Ron's group in the last 7 or 8 years is actually really, really good. They talk about, what's the right way to do a threat assessment, right? What's the right way to do adversary modeling? What's the right way to put together a business continuity program? All the stuff that has come out of those are really good, and I would encourage you to scroll through the NIST special publications every once in a while. It's an incredible resource that all of our tax dollars have made available to us. It's good stuff. So, takeaway, the frameworks are there and the building blocks are there for the cybersecurity space to become more scientific and more rigorous. And that's a good thing. It's not just people putting their finger in the air anymore, pontificating about, how much we should spend and which controls we should have in place. Excuse me. It's much more a function of a deliberate scientific approach to controls and spend. By the way, live in Chicago, we're very sensitive to fires in Chicago. And fire protection used to be an art if people cared about it. And, some people knew they should build brick buildings and some people just, wanted to build wood buildings with straw floors. And then obviously the Chicago fire changed everything. What happened? Building codes became more scientific. The insurance companies started effective regulation of building codes because of managing down their exposure. All kinds of really interesting things are features of modern city building codes if you look at them. In downtown Chicago, for example, your requirements change based on how far away from the fire station you are. Based on what kind of a building you have. If you have a large residential high-rise of more than 20 units and you're next door to the fire station, you have different requirements than if you're that same 20-unit high-rise that's 2 miles from the fire station, right? You might not have to have armored stairwells or two-way communication systems or what have you. Why? Makes sense. The building and the occupants have to be more survivable if the fire station is 2 miles away and it's going to take 20 minutes for the cavalry to get there. If the cavalry's next door, the building doesn't need to be as survivable. This sort of evolution, our craft becoming more scientific, is an important part of where we are in the space today, and it's super exciting to watch it happen. All of our assessments for the past 20 years or so have largely been point-in-time assessments. Most people begrudgingly do their annual PCR assessment on their annual because they have to, and they're pissed off about it the whole time, and they RFP it and give it to the lowest bidder, and it gets delivered in a thud, and nobody ever looks at it, and it collects dust. Okay, that's fine. I've been an offensive guy for years, and very often the same stuff you did last year works this year, and it'll work again next year. Right? Because nobody ever looks at that report. It sits there and collects dust, and when you pick it up next year to move it over, there's a little square of, clean spot because the dust didn't get on the table. That's not a useful engagement. That doesn't make people better, right? That doesn't make the person receiving the report better. So what are we seeing in terms of assessments? And this goes for controls assessments, not just offensive engagements and technical assessments. Very large, monolithic, prose-heavy engagements that, again, get delivered with a thud, right, don't lead to betterment, don't lead to the client getting better. Multiple, tightly scoped engagements occurring over time, some people call that continuous, air quotes, that actually helps the client get better. If you do a series of 3, 4, 5 tightly scoped engagements over the course of a year, bite-sized results, maybe some purple teaming, again, call that on-the-job training, or help the defenders understand what they're doing, right? The client's going to get better. The recipient is going to get better as a result of those engagements. So, continuous, again, quote, buzzword, that's the right way to think of continuous, right? The way to think about continuous is delivering a series of tightly scoped engagements so that the blue team, the defenders, can actually get better as a result. We're not doing these things for fun. Some people are. But most of the time, we're doing it so people actually get better, right? And you make people better by giving them bite-sized pieces and then some interaction along the way. Continuous and that kind of thinking goes, in lots of areas, like application testing, web apps, APIs, right? Testing a big monolithic application once a year, it might satisfy a compliance obligation. It's not likely to make the app much better, right? If the app is being actively developed, once a year is not helpful. I mean, heck, I might want to test it, weekly. If somebody's in there monkeying with, session management or authentication or any of the stuff that people screw up, right? Almost all web app vulnerabilities at some point are the result of somebody screwing up authentication or session management. Test that a lot. If nobody's touching the web app or somebody's, editing the database, right? I mean, then don't test it, right? Don't waste your time if you've already tested it. Be smart, right? Be smart. Test what needs to be tested. Set up a structured program to test things as your risk increases, as sensitive parts of the code are being touched, and have it make sense. The velocity of kind of development and deployment around, DevOps, DevSecOps, cloudy stuff, all of those things is really important because the traditional, develop, stage, test, release cycle that we're all used to from, many, many years ago, that doesn't really exist anymore, right? I mean, in the time that we've been sitting here, Slack has probably released, 5 different, revisions to their code base, right? And Facebook has released 50. So, making sure that your testing matches your risk profile. When are you changing things? What are you touching? When are you deploying things? Is a critical way to use these tests to manage down your risk. And finally, security is like firefighting. And I use that example all the time. You are never going to prohibit fires by policy. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, not allowed to have fires in this building because Policy 4, Section A, Paragraph 3 says no fires. It doesn't work like that. You're going to have fires. How do you manage down the risk of a fire? Rapid detection and rapid response. Okay, how is the entire fire industry organized? Right? Smoke detectors, alarms, response in the form of the cavalry, right? In Chicago, survivability during that interim is a big thing that is actively considered. If this building is on fire, how long do the people in that building have to survive before the cavalry gets there, right? And then, that determines the structure of the building and, again, external stairwells and alarms and stuff like that. We have made the grave mistake of viewing information security as a win or lose, binary yes, no, right or wrong. You get breached, you fire your CISO, somebody screwed up. And the space just doesn't work like that. We're in a state of persistent conflict. You're going to have breaches. Bad things are going to happen. It is not about making sure that these bad things never happen. It's about rapidly detecting and responding to and limiting the damage. Again, exactly like a fire. And so people need to think about security, again, not as a castle and moat and keep the bad guys out, but in this state of persistent conflict or persistent adversarial activities, and then a detection and a response time frame that makes sense. If my building is on fire in downtown Chicago, 20 minutes, survivability and the cavalry be in there is about right. If my assumptions are the building is on fire and we're going to detect it sometime next Thursday, there's probably a mismatch there, right? Security is the same way. So many times people have an entire response structure set up that if something bad happens on the Friday of Thanksgiving weekend, nobody sees it until the next Monday, if ever. Right? How many MSSPs or MDRs will call you and tell you 2 weeks from now, oh yeah, I guess you had a pen test last week? Okay, they're not wrong, but is that useful? Did that solve a problem? Are you more secure because somebody told you something really bad happened 2 weeks ago? Sucks to be you. Right? Thinking about the timing of these things makes sense. And then you get into all kinds of really interesting, and again, the right sorts of planning conversations. Okay, so if a bad guy is in my system or I think something's going wrong, something's going sideways on me, how long is okay until I detect that? Don't know. If you're, JP Morgan Chase, it's probably a pretty tight window. If you're, defending nuclear launch codes, it's probably a pretty tight window. If you're a Wisconsin bolt manufacturer, I love Wisconsin bolt manufacturers, but you probably don't need, 15-minute detection and response windows. You get to make a smart business risk decision like that. If I've decided that, I want to have a response of an hour, just for sake of argument, there's really no right or wrong answer, as long as you know the answer. Okay, who's going to do that on the Friday of Thanksgiving weekend? How do I do that? Do I have a staff, 24/7, 365, extended business hours? Do I outsource that? What's my SLA look like with my outsource partner? If anybody in here is using MSP, MSSP, MDR, EDR, XDR, whatever Gartner wants to call it, look very carefully at how that detection and response dance works contractually, right? What are the SLAs? I can't tell you how many pen tests I've been on where there was an MDR, XDR, EDR, MSSP. Again, they're all, Gartner will tell you the difference. And, they didn't call or, send an email or a smoke signal or a carrier pigeon, ever, or, maybe a couple days later. Is that okay? Is that what you wanted, right? And then what happens when the red phone rings? What happens when the red phone rings on Friday of Thanksgiving weekend? Who answers? What do they do? What are the first 5 things that they do? So these are important questions because, again, time is everything. Time is everything. Let me pause there. Questions, thoughts? Make sense? I see some nods. It's good. Okay. So this I lovingly call the periodic table of MITRE. You've probably seen versions of this in other places. It's totally unreadable, so sorry. But it's organized. The columns are kind of major techniques in the MITRE world. So Think authentication, session management, memory isolation, et cetera, et cetera. And then all the blocks underneath that are detailed techniques underneath that. So if you've got, like an authentication, issue, bad password, two-factor bypass, right, et cetera, and it goes down. One block is one attacker activity that you need to figure out something to do about. So I said earlier, roughly 300 techniques in the MITRE ATT&CK and sub-technique catalog. Right? So this is it. So this is a great way to organize your defensive program, right? How am I doing against those blocks? Well, let's see. I've got controls, right, from the tools that I have. So I've got a firewall, I've got, an IDS, I've got, some sort of an EDR thingy-majigger, I've got some sort of a, CASB filtery thingy-majigger. By the way, I get to use all these super technical terms because everybody up and down the hallways at RSA, they're an endpoint thingy-majigger, they're a filter thingy-majigger, or they're authentication thingy-majigger, or they're something else. Well, that's kind of it. I mean, really, you should be in the hallways at RSA, right? This is the authentication hallway, this is the endpoint hallway, this is maybe even rooms or buildings. So how do my controls lay out against the MITRE ATT&CK universe? Well, I'll give you an answer. Okay, that's interesting. So, in this chart, we've got, some greens, some reds, and some oranges. And then you notice there's some outlines as well. There's kind of two characteristics to each block. Well, attackers use different techniques too, right? So certain attackers and threat actor groups prefer different techniques. Why? Earlier slide, they're lazy. They do the same things over and over again while they still work. If you're in banking and finance, you face a fairly particular set of adversaries, and they're pretty lazy and they do pretty much the same thing over and over again because it works. Ditto that for healthcare, ditto that for manufacturing. Okay? Well, we can lay that on this chart too. So now you've got a coverage view of the world. I've got my industry, my company, say I'm banking and finance. I can take these blocks and make outlines around those blocks for the things that attackers in my space like to do. I can take my controls and color in the blocks and say, how am I doing against that technique? Okay, well, these blocks with, green outline and green middle, those are areas in our annotation here where controls and attacker groups match up. So for all the, green outer, green inner, attacker group, does that thing, and we've got a control that will manage down that risk. Reds on the outside, mean that's something that we have a control, but attackers aren't particularly interested in that. Oh, wait a minute. We've got a control that attackers aren't really interested in. That's a candidate for a tool I might not need. What if I've got a whole bunch of those, or maybe 3 or 4 sets of tools that provide the same coverage in the same block? That's a candidate for decommissioning. Holy crap, a security guy just said I don't need a tool? Wow. The red blocks, well, the red blocks are where, if I've got $1 to spend, I might want to look at the red blocks. Because the red blocks are a space where an attacker group has an interest and has a capability and has a history of doing something that I don't have controls against. That sounds pretty bad. Maybe somebody should look into that. So, but, there's a but. Controls aren't that simple. Those first couple of slides, I just told you that, controls suck and nobody knows if their controls work and they don't work and they never did work and they don't work tomorrow. I said a bunch of things like that, right? So we need to quantify a little bit about what those blocks mean. So because I'm an engineer and I'm terrible at coming up with names, I just use acronyms. So CDTRV, and there's no trademark on that because it's dumb. But for every one of those blocks, right, we should understand. So a block, remember, a block is an attacker technique. Okay, something very, very specific and probably technical. Bypass two-factor authentication. Dump memory on an active Windows process, right? Something super specific. Okay? Every block should have a set of controls. What is a control? Really, we all talk about them. What is a control? Control is just something to get in the bad guy's way, either slow him down or make him make noise that'll cause him to get detected. That's all a control is. A bank vault is not designed to be impervious. A bank vault is designed to have the bad guys show up with explosives and jackhammers so that somebody sees them, right? That's what a control is. Okay, every block has a control. Okay. A control is probably a tool or a configuration setting, right? But a control is something you have, direct control over. All right, what happens? Remember, bank vault, fire, control is not enough, right? The bank vault is not impervious. The bank vault is designed to slow the bad guy down and to make the bad guy make a bunch of noise by, again, throwing dynamite at it and jackhammers and things like that until the cavalry gets there. Same thing as fire protection. Building's not impervious. We just have to be survivable until the cavalry gets there. The part that we forget in information security is that controls are not enough. We need to have detections, right? Every box, okay, set of controls. We're going to slow the bad guy down. We're going to make the bad guy be noisy. Great. Okay, what happens if I've got a persistent bad guy, well-funded bad guy that's been working on me for a while? Because remember, we are in a persistent state of conflict. So how do I know when somebody's banging at some particular technique? Got to have detections and alerts. Got it. Otherwise, you're going to give the bad guy unlimited time, and a bad guy with unlimited time is going to get in. And just are. Detections have all sorts of problems that we all know about, false negatives, false positives, etc. That's another whole talk. That's not this talk. Got to have detections. Timing. We talked about that. Okay? So a control slows a bad guy down for how long? Well, again, there's a lot of science here. You guys familiar with GSA containers in the classified world? So GSA containers, so the classified world, if I have had a top secret document, right? There's a regulation that says that my top secret document has to be in a GSA class 3 or better container. What is a GSA class 3 or better container? Well, fascinating. I would say go look up how GSA containers are rated. It's all public information. GSA containers are rated based on assumptions about a bad guy, tool set, and time. A GSA class 3 container, look it up, it says that a GSA class 3 container will resist surreptitious entry from a bad guy armed with everything except explosives for 30 minutes or more. What does that mean? That means that all the detection that you put around that GSA class 3 container, the cavalry better get there in 30 minutes or less, because after that, we make no guarantees about whether the bad guy can get in or not. We're seeing a pattern here, right? Fire detection, resist for a period of time until the cavalry comes. Bank vaults, resist for an amount of time until the cavalry comes. GSA containers, resist for an amount of time before the cavalry comes. As our space progresses and gets more scientific, we have to do that here. Timing. The control has to function, slow them down for a certain amount of time. The detection has to fire. Those things have to make sense. If my if my control slows the bad guy down for 20 seconds and my detection window is 3 hours, well, that's not so good. Okay? Has to make sense. We have to know. There's almost no wrong answer, right? But we have to know these things. Response and validation. So, when the control slows the bad guy down and we detect that the bad guy is doing bad things and the timing is, we're going to do all of those things in an hour, then what? Well, what's the response? The fire truck shows up and they, dump water on the problem. GSA, container, there's an alarm around it, some FBI guys show up with guns. What do? I don't know. Depends on the control with a little block, right? If the control is an authentication-related thing, maybe our first move is to shut down the account. If the control is a memory, dump-related thing, maybe the the control is to isolate the machine, or the response, I'm sorry, is to isolate the machine. Got to know what to do. Got to know what to do within that timing window. Figuring out all of those things and that dance with your MSP, MSSP, EDR, XDR, whatever, figuring out that dance and being really clear about it, super important. Almost nobody does a good job of that, really. Right? I mean, like, it just doesn't happen. And you find that in offensive testing. It's a disaster, and everybody's pointing at everybody else. But these are the things, right? This is what you do. Validation. So again, all that stuff that I said earlier, controls don't work the way you think they do. They never did. Jeff changed things. Jeff shut things off. Jeff's a really bad guy. Does a bunch of stupid stuff. Well, what is an offensive test? An offensive test, as we said earlier, it's a validation of controls. Let's make sure that all this crap that we just talked about actually works the way that we think it does, and still does today. Just because it did yesterday doesn't mean anything. Let's see if it did today. Okay? How many of you have gone through the pen test plan where the pen testers show up and say, hey, honey, what do you want to do today? And you look at them and say, I don't know, what do you want to do today? Well, let's do an outside in. We haven't done one of those in a while. Okay, sounds great. Let's do fishing. Okay, that sounds good. We haven't done one of those in a while. We should validate certain things based on the periodic table of MITRE before, right? So you go back to that chart, like you see, red things with lots of red, or, red around the edges. Bad guys are doing things, right? They're attacking these controls. Maybe we should go validate those controls, right? If you're worried about ransomware, you don't care about all NIST 853 controls equally. There's like 650 of them. You don't care. You care about like 12. Do those really well. Validate those often, right? If you're worried about, if you've got super secret data and you're worried about that data walking out the door, like there's probably 10 or 20 controls that really matter in your environment. Like go validate those, right? Have confidence in those. Set up your offensive engagements and your compliance assessments and things like that around the controls that matter for your company's loss scenarios, for things that matter. Every block has validation requirements around it. This needs to be validated at this period, at this frequency, for these reasons. Yes? Oh, yeah. So a control is something you put in place to slow down a bad guy or to make the bad guy make noise. Configure something a certain way, have a tool, have a firewall, have an EDR, have a, Zscaler sort of a thing to watch stuff going out the door, right? And by the way, I use all vendor names lovingly. I love all vendors equally. Just doesn't happen to be very much. And those controls are things that you can do, right? A validation is making sure that control works the way that you think it does, the way it's written down, the way it's supposed to, the way the vendor told you, etc. Does that make sense? Okay. So, back to my first question. How do we pick controls? So if you have a coverage view like this, not only are your gaps obvious, your overinvestments, your underinvestments, but you can do really interesting things like I've got MDR provider 1, 2, and 3. Well, which one do I want? Okay, back to my third or fourth slide. I mean, MDR vendor certainly has awesome parties. So I mean that could be a reason we pick MDR vendor 1. But MDR vendors 1, 2, and 3 might have different MITRE attack coverage characteristics. By the way, MITRE now tests vendors and makes that data available to us. It's the MITRE, it's like Insperity or something weird. It's not Insperity, but there's go look at all the MITRE projects lovingly because they're awesome. And there's some project, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but they test, it's like the old NS Labs used to do. But they test vendors and tell you what MITRE attack techniques they cover. Yeah, no, this is a MITRE project. I keep thinking Insperity, but that's something different. Integrity, ingenuity? Yeah, somebody else think of it. This is a great way to evaluate vendors in your environment, right? MSP or EDRA, right, might have a coverage footprint that overlaps more with your existing controls than MSP B or C. So even though A throws killer parties, and we love those guys, and you know the sales guy we know used to work at my company, and now they work there, and like, okay, great, but MSP B might be better for my company than MSP A for my specific environment. Okay, cool. Questions, comments, thoughts? Say again? Engage might be engage. Look up, I know CrowdStrike has a profile, and so if there's a CrowdStrike profile that tells you, yeah, if they give you a vendor and a list of techniques, yeah. All right, so a wonderful, infinity loop, because infinity, I mean, who doesn't love an infinity loop? But really, we talked, very first slide was this whole concept of defense optimization, right? And there's a practice that I like to call continuous defense improvement. And that's this, wonderful virtuous cycle that somebody way better at PowerPoint than me made. But it pulls everything together here that we've talked about for the last hour, right? Take your controls, map them against a framework. 853 is great. CSF is great. CSF is more practical than 853, but really, 853 is the universe, the Rosetta Stone. Every controls framework you could ever possibly want maps against 853 somehow. So it's a fine one. Threat actors, MITRE gives you threat actors. They package up some of the most common ones. If you're a member of, like an ISAC, FSISAC, Health ISAC, whatever, right? They have information about threat actors that target your industry. A lot of the MSPs, and again, MDR, EDR, XDR, that whole universe of people, some of them do, primary research on threat actors and release products, information products, about threat actors, the techniques they use, et cetera. That can fill you in on the right? On the left side, this is really about your business. Again, not every business has the same security needs, and it's easy to overinvest in security just like it's easy to underinvest in security. So you think about, your timing requirements, your loss scenarios. As they change, you're not going to be in the same business, 2 years from now that you probably are now. And so, understanding how these things change, those are the left columns here, validating with, offensive testing. There's an emergence of kind of automated technical testing tools, right now. Some of those are fine. Some things have to be tested manually. There's, right tool for the job. And then, gluing all that together with the right control set, and the control set have to include detections and responses. Ha-ha, perfect timing. Thoughts, questions, comments? Cool. I even think, yeah. Ingenuity, is that? Cool, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Cool. Well, obviously I have some, excitement about this stuff. Love to talk about it. If you have any questions or comments, drop me a line. Again, it was fun, and thank you for hanging out with me here at the end of the day. Yeah, thanks.